The axe blade bit into the wood with a dull thud, and Sarah Brennan felt the sharp sting of torn skin before she even looked down at her palms. Blood mixed with the raw fluid from the blisters that had formed over the past 3 hours. But she could not stop now, not when winter was coming to the Montana territory and her father lay dying in the cabin behind her. It was October 1883, and the aspen leaves had already turned golden across the mountainside near the small settlement of Bannack. Sarah's father, Thomas Brennan, had caught pneumonia 2 weeks earlier, and the illness had settled deep in his lungs. At 22 years old, Sarah found herself alone on their homestead, desperate to prepare enough firewood to last through the brutal winter that would arrive within weeks. Their woodpile was dangerously low, and her father had been too weak to lift an axe for nearly a month. She raised the axe again, ignoring the burning pain in her hands. The log split unevenly, and she bent to arrange another piece on the chopping block. Her dark hair, usually pinned neatly, had come loose and hung in damp strands around her face. Her calico dress was soaked with sweat despite the cool autumn air, and her arms trembled with exhaustion. She had been at this since dawn, and the sun now hung high overhead. Sarah positioned the axe and swung again. This time her grip faltered and the handle slipped in her bloody palms. The axe went wide, missing the log entirely, and she stumbled forward with a cry of frustration. Tears burned in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Crying would solve nothing. Her father needed warmth, needed medicine, needed so many things she could barely afford. "Ma'am, I think you better stop before you lose a foot." The voice came from behind her, deep and steady. Sarah spun around, instinctively gripping the axe handle despite the agony in her palms. A man sat astride a bay horse at the edge of her property, watching her with an expression that seemed caught between concern and admiration. He was tall even in the saddle, with broad shoulders and sun-darkened skin. A black Stetson hat shadowed his face, but she could see his eyes were a striking blue-gray, like storm clouds over the mountains. He wore a dusty trail coat over a dark vest and cotton shirt, and a coiled rope hung from his saddle alongside well-worn saddlebags. "This is private property," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady. She knew she must look wild, desperate even, but she stood her ground. "I can see that." The man dismounted slowly, as if trying not to startle a skittish horse. "I am just passing through, heading toward Virginia City. Saw you from the road and thought you might need some help." His gaze dropped to her hands and his expression tightened. "Looks like I was right." "I am managing fine," Sarah said, but even as the words left her mouth, she felt warm blood trickling down her wrists. The cowboy walked closer, moving with an easy confidence that spoke of years in the saddle. He was perhaps 26 or 27, with a strong jaw and features that might have been handsome if they were not so weathered by sun and wind. When he reached her, he gently took the axe from her grip. Sarah wanted to protest, but the relief of releasing the heavy tool was too great. "Let me see your hands," he said quietly. Sarah hesitated, then held out her palms. The blisters had burst and torn, leaving raw, bleeding wounds across both hands. Splinters had embedded themselves in the soft flesh, and dirt had worked its way into the cuts. The cowboy's jaw tightened as he studied the damage. "You have been at this for hours, have you not?" "We need the wood," Sarah said simply. "Winter is coming and my father is sick. I have to prepare." The cowboy looked toward the cabin, then back at the meager woodpile, then at Sarah's face. Something in his expression shifted, softened. "Wait here," he said. He walked back to his horse and rummaged through his saddlebags, returning with a clean cloth and a small tin. "This is going to hurt," he warned, then carefully began cleaning her hands with water from his canteen. Sarah bit her lip hard enough to taste blood, but she did not make a sound. The cowboy worked with surprising gentleness, picking out splinters with steady fingers before applying salve from the tin. "What is your name?" Sarah asked, needing to focus on something other than the pain. "Cole Hartman," he replied, not looking up from his work. I have been driving cattle up from Texas, but the trail boss paid us off in but last week. Thought I would see some country before I decide what comes next. Sarah Brennan, she said. This is my father's homestead. We have been here 5 years. Cole began tearing the cloth into strips, wrapping her hands with practiced efficiency. You have brothers, other family who can help. No, just me and my father. My mother died 3 years ago, fever. Sarah watched as he tied off the bandages. His hands were calloused and scarred, the hands of a man who knew hard work. You do not have to help us. I know you are just passing through. Cole looked up at her then, and she saw something in his eyes that made her heart skip. It was not pity exactly, but a kind of understanding, as if he knew what it meant to be alone and desperate. I am not in any particular hurry, he said. And you have got a lot of wood that needs splitting. Before Sarah could respond, Cole had removed his coat and rolled up his sleeves. He positioned a log on the chopping block, tested the axe weight, and brought it down in a smooth, powerful arc. The log split cleanly in two. He worked with an easy rhythm, his movements efficient and controlled. Each swing was precise, wasting no energy, and the pile of split wood began to grow steadily. Sarah stood watching for a moment, overwhelmed by the unexpected kindness. Then she shook herself and moved to stack the split logs. Her bandaged hands made the work awkward, but she managed. They worked in silence for a while, falling into an unspoken rhythm. Cole would split the wood and Sarah would stack it against the side of the cabin where it would stay dry. After an hour, Cole paused to catch his breath. Sweat darkened his shirt despite the cool air. Your father, he said. How bad is he? Bad, Sarah admitted. The word came out rough. The doctor came last week, but there is not much he can do except recommend rest and warmth. We do not have money for more visits. Cole nodded slowly, then went back to splitting logs. He worked for another 2 hours without complaint, and Sarah marveled at his strength and endurance. By the time the sun began sinking toward the western mountains, they had nearly doubled the woodpile. That should help, Cole said, finally setting down the axe. He was breathing hard, and his shirt clung to his back with sweat. I do not know how to thank you, Sarah said. The words felt inadequate for what he had done. Can I at least offer you supper? It will not be much, but it is the least I can do. Cole glanced toward the setting sun, then at his horse, then back at Sarah. I would appreciate that, he said. Inside the cabin, Sarah's father lay on a narrow bed near the fireplace. Thomas Brennan had once been a robust man, but illness had whittled him down to bones and shallow breathing. His eyes opened as they entered, sharp and suspicious despite his weakness. Who is that? He rasped. His name is Cole Hartman, Papa. He helped me with the wood. Sarah moved to the fireplace and began building up the fire with the fresh logs Cole had split. He is staying for supper. Thomas studied Cole with the wary gaze of a man who had learned not to trust easily on the frontier. But he must have seen something acceptable in the cowboy's honest face, because he gave a slight nod. Obliged for the help, he managed before a coughing fit seized him. Sarah hurried to her father's side with a cup of water, supporting his head while he drank. When the coughing subsided, she settled him back against the pillows and pulled a quilt up to his chin. The cabin was small, just one main room with a loft above, but Sarah had done her best to keep it clean and comfortable. A rough-hewn table and chairs occupied the center of the room, and shelves along one wall held their meager supplies. She prepared a simple meal of beans, cornbread, and the last of their salted pork. Cole sat quietly at the table, not speaking unless spoken to, but his presence somehow made the cabin feel less lonely. When the food was ready, Sarah brought a bowl to her father, but he managed only a few bites before exhaustion claimed him again. She returned to the table and sat across from Cole. They ate in silence for a few minutes, then Cole said, "How long has he been this sick?" 2 weeks at his worst, but he has been declining for a month. Sarah stared at her bowl. I keep hoping he will turn a corner, get stronger, but each day he seems a little weaker. And when he gets better, you will work this place alone until then. I have been managing, Sarah said defensively. I can see that. Cole's voice was gentle. I meant no offense. You are clearly a strong woman, but this is a hard life for anyone alone, especially heading into winter. Sarah felt tears threatening again and blinked them back angrily. She had not cried once since her father fell ill, and she would not start now in front of this stranger, no matter how kind he had been. I will manage, she repeated. Cole was quiet for a moment, then said, I could stay on for a few days, help you finish the winter preparations. You have got wood now, but I noticed your roof needs some repairs and that fence line is in poor shape. If wolves come down from the mountains when the snow gets deep, they will go right through it. Sarah looked up sharply. I cannot pay you. I am not asking for payment. Just food and a place to sleep. I can bed down in the barn. Why would you do that? You do not know us. Cole met her eyes steadily. Let us just say I know what it is like to need help and have nowhere to turn. A few years back, I was thrown from a horse and broke my leg 50 miles from anywhere. A family of homesteaders found me and took me in for 2 months while I healed, never asked for a thing. I figure I owe the world a debt for that kindness. Sarah wanted to refuse, wanted to maintain her pride and independence, but she was exhausted and afraid and so very alone. A few days, she said finally, and you will let me feed you proper meals at least. A slight smile touched Cole's lips, the first she had seen from him. That is a deal I can accept. True to his word, Cole spent the next morning repairing the cabin roof, replacing worn shingles and sealing gaps before the winter snows came. Sarah worked alongside him when she could, though her bandaged hands limited what she could do. Mostly she handed him tools and supplies while trying not to notice how his muscles moved beneath his shirt, or how his rare smiles made something warm unfurl in her chest. By afternoon, Cole had moved on to the fence line. Sarah brought him water and watched as he reset posts and restrung wire. He worked with the same steady efficiency he had shown splitting wood, never rushing but never wasting motion either. You are good at this, she observed. Cole shrugged. I have done most every kind of work there is, cowboying, farming, mining, logging. You pick things up. Where is your family? Sarah asked, then immediately regretted the question. I am sorry, that is too personal. It is all right. Cole hammered in another post. Never knew my father. My mother died when I was 14. I have been on my own since then mostly. Worked cattle drives, hired on at ranches. Never stayed anywhere too long. That sounds lonely. Sometimes, Cole admitted, but it has its freedoms too, no one to answer to, no one to disappoint. He glanced at her. Though I admit it gets tiresome, moving all the time, never putting down roots. Lately I have been thinking it might be nice to have a place to call home. Something in his tone made Sarah's heart beat faster, but she told herself not to read too much into his words. He was being kind, nothing more. In a few days he would move on and she would return to managing alone. That was simply how things were. That evening, as Sarah prepared dinner, her father called weakly from his bed. Sarah, come here. She went to his side, alarmed by the urgency in his voice. What is wrong, Papa? Are you in pain? I am dying, girl. We both know it. Thomas's voice was thin but steady. Before I go, I need to know you will be all right. Do not talk like that. You are going to recover. Sarah. Her father gripped her hand with surprising strength. Listen to me. That cowboy Cole, he is a good man, I can see it in him. And I see how he looks at you. Papa, he is just helping us. He will be gone in a few days. Maybe or maybe not if you give him a reason to stay. Thomas's eyes were fierce in his wasted face. I do not want to leave you alone out here. This land is too hard, too dangerous for a woman on her own. Promise me you will at least consider it, consider him. I barely know him, Sarah protested, but her cheeks burned. You know he is honest and hard-working. You know he is kind. Sometimes that is enough to build on. Another coughing fit seized him, and when it passed, he looked exhausted. Just promise me you will think about it. I promise, Sarah whispered, though she was not sure what exactly she was promising. Over the next 3 days, Cole continued working around the homestead. He repaired the barn door, cleaned out the well, and even fixed Sarah's broken butter churn. In the evenings, he would sit at the table with Sarah and talk quietly while her father slept. She learned that he had been born in Missouri, that his mother had been a washerwoman who worked herself to death trying to provide for him, that he had gone west at 15 seeking fortune and adventure, but mostly finding hard work and hard lessons. In turn, Sarah told him about growing up in Ohio, about her father's dream of owning land, about the long journey west 5 years ago. She told him about her mother, who had been a teacher before marriage and had made sure Sarah could read and write and cipher. She told him about the loneliness of frontier life, the way weeks could pass without seeing another soul. "Do you ever think about leaving?" Cole asked one evening. "Going back east where life is easier?" Sarah considered the question. "Sometimes," she admitted. "When things are hard, when I feel overwhelmed. But this place means something to my father. He built this cabin with his own hands, cleared this land, made something from nothing. I cannot abandon that. Even if he passes," Cole's voice was gentle, "even then, it would be like losing him twice." Cole nodded slowly, and Sarah thought she saw approval in his eyes. On the fourth night, a cold rain began to fall, drumming against the roof Cole had repaired. Sarah's father worsened, his breathing becoming more labored, his fever spiking. Sarah sat by his bedside all night, sponging his forehead with cool water while Cole kept the fire going and heated broth that Thomas was too weak to swallow. By dawn, Thomas Brennan had slipped into unconsciousness. Sarah held his hand and whispered prayers she half remembered from childhood. Cole stood behind her, one hand resting gently on her shoulder, a solid presence in her grief. Thomas died as the sun rose, slipping away so quietly that Sarah almost missed the moment. One breath, then nothing. She sat frozen for a long moment, unable to quite believe it was over. Then the tears came, finally, breaking through the dam she had built over the past weeks. She wept like a child, great wrenching sobs that shook her whole body. Cole pulled her up from the chair and into his arms, holding her while she cried. He did not offer empty platitudes or tell her it would be all right. He simply held her, strong and steady, and let her grieve. They buried Thomas Brennan on a hillside overlooking the valley, near where Sarah's mother already rested. Cole dug the grave himself, working through the hard ground with grim determination. Sarah read from the Bible over the grave, her voice breaking on the words. Afterward, they stood in silence while the wind whispered through the golden aspens. "What will you do now?" Cole asked as they walked back to the cabin. "I suppose I will stay," Sarah said, though the thought of facing winter alone in the cabin filled her with dread. "This is my home." Cole was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Sarah, I know this is poor timing. Your father just passed and you are grieving, and I have only been here less than a week, but I need to say this before I lose my nerve." He stopped walking and turned to face her. "I would like to stay, not just for a few more days, permanently. I could help you work this land, see you through the winter and beyond. We could be partners in this." Sarah's heart was pounding. "Cole, you do not have to do this out of pity. I will manage somehow. This is not pity." His storm-gray eyes were intense. "Sarah, I have been drifting for 12 years, never finding a place that felt right. But these past days, working on this land, sitting at your table in the evenings, it has felt more like home than anywhere I have been. And you." He reached out and gently touched her cheek. "You are the strongest, bravest woman I have ever met. The way you fought to take care of your father, the way you refused to give up no matter how hard things got, I admire that. I admire you." "I barely know you," Sarah whispered, but she did not pull away from his touch. "Then let us get to know each other. Let me stay, Sarah. Let me help you build something here." He paused, then added quietly, "Your father spoke to me yesterday. He told me he thought I should stay. He said he could see that I care for you, and he believed you might care for me too." Tears spilled down Sarah's cheeks again, but these were different tears. "He told me the same thing," she admitted. "He said you were a good man, that I should give you a reason to stay." "Then let me stay," Cole repeated. Sarah thought about the long winter ahead, about the loneliness she had endured for so long, about the weight of managing the homestead alone. But more than that, she thought about how right it felt to have Cole here, how his presence made the cabin feel less empty, how her heart lifted when she heard his voice. It had only been days, but sometimes you simply knew. "Yes," she said, "stay." Cole's smile was like the sun breaking through storm clouds. He pulled her into his arms again, and this time when he held her, it was different. Sarah leaned into his warmth and let herself feel something other than grief and exhaustion. She let herself feel hope. The winter of 1883 was brutal, with snow that piled higher than the cabin windows and temperatures that dropped far below zero. But inside the little homestead, there was warmth. Cole proved to be as good as his word, working tirelessly to keep them fed and comfortable. He hunted deer and elk in the mountains, set trap lines for rabbits and beaver, and made sure the woodpile never ran low. Sarah, for her part, cooked and mended and kept their home clean and welcoming. Her hands healed slowly, the blisters fading to calluses and then to smooth skin again. She and Cole fell into an easy partnership, working together during the day and sitting by the fire in the evenings, talking about their pasts and their hopes for the future. As the weeks passed, their relationship deepened. Cole would touch her hand as he passed her tools, or Sarah would let her fingers linger on his shoulder when she served him dinner. They sat closer together by the fireplace, and sometimes Sarah would wake in the night and hear Cole moving around the cabin, checking the fire or looking out at the snow-covered landscape, watching over her. In December, during a brief warming spell, Cole saddled his horse and rode to Bannack. He returned with supplies and a small package wrapped in brown paper. That evening, he handed it to Sarah with uncharacteristic nervousness. Inside was a simple gold ring. "It is not much," Cole said quickly, "but I wanted to do this properly. Sarah Brennan, would you marry me? Would you let me be your husband, not just your partner on this land, but in life?" Sarah looked at the ring, then at Cole's anxious face, and felt her heart swell with emotion. She had known it was coming to this, had felt the love growing between them like a seed taking root in good soil. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." They married in January at the small church in Bannack, with the circuit preacher officiating and a handful of townsfolk as witnesses. Sarah wore her mother's best dress, carefully preserved in a trunk, and Cole wore a new shirt he had bought with money saved from his cattle-driving days. It was a simple ceremony, but when Cole slipped the ring onto her finger and kissed her as his wife, Sarah felt a joy she had not known was possible. The return to the cabin as husband and wife felt like coming home in a new way. That night, with the fire burning low and snow falling softly outside, they became truly man and wife. Cole was gentle and patient, and Sarah discovered that love was not just about survival and partnership, but about the tender intimacy of two people choosing each other completely. The rest of the winter passed quickly. They talked about their plans for the homestead, how they would expand the planting in spring, perhaps get some chickens and a milk cow. Cole wanted to build a larger barn, and Sarah dreamed of having a proper vegetable garden. They spoke of children, of building a family, of putting down roots so deep nothing could shake them. When spring finally arrived, melting the snow and revealing the greening earth beneath, Sarah and Cole worked side by side to prepare the land for planting. Her hands, once soft and blistered, were now strong and capable. She could swing an axe almost as well as Cole, could plow a straight furrow and mend a fence line. The work was still hard, but shared between them, it felt manageable, even joyful. In April, Sarah realized she was with child. She told Cole one evening after supper, watching his face carefully for his reaction. For a moment he simply stared at her, and then a grin spread across his face so wide and genuine that it made her laugh. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Sarah asked, though she could already see the answer in his eyes. Happy does not begin to cover it. Cole pulled her into his arms and spun her around, making her squeal with laughter. "Sarah, you have made me the happiest man in Montana." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer months. Sarah bloomed with health, and Cole became almost comically protective, insisting she avoid anything he deemed too strenuous. She tolerated his hovering with amused patience, understanding that it came from love. They had visitors that summer, neighbors from other homesteads who had heard about Thomas Brennan's death and the new husband Sarah had found. The women brought preserves and advice, while the men helped Cole with the heavier work around the property. Sarah discovered that she was no longer alone in the wilderness, that there was a community here if you reached out for it. In November, just over a year after Cole had first ridden up to find her chopping wood with bleeding hands, Sarah went into labor. The neighboring women came to help, and after a long night of work, Sarah delivered a healthy baby boy. They named him Thomas after her father, and when Cole held his son for the first time, Sarah saw tears streaming down his weathered face. "Thank you," he whispered to Sarah. "Thank you for letting me stay, for giving me this life, for loving me." "Thank you for wrapping my hands that day," Sarah replied. "Thank you for seeing me, for helping me, for choosing to stay." The years that followed were not always easy. The Montana winters remained harsh, and there were crop failures and sick animals and all the struggles that came with frontier life. But Sarah and Cole faced them together, their love deepening with each challenge overcome. They had 3 more children over the next 7 years, 2 daughters and another son, and their little cabin grew to accommodate the expanding family. Cole built the larger barn he had dreamed of, and Sarah planted an extensive garden that became the envy of the neighboring homesteads. They acquired chickens and a milk cow, and eventually Cole began breeding horses, discovering he had a talent for it. The homestead prospered slowly but steadily. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Cole took Sarah back to the hillside where her parents were buried. They stood looking out over the valley at the cabin that had grown into a proper house, at the fields and pastures they had carved from the wilderness, at the life they had built together. "Do you ever regret it?" Sarah asked. "Staying here instead of moving on, seeing more of the world?" Cole pulled her close, his arm around her waist. "Not for a single moment. I spent 12 years wandering, searching for something I could not name. Turned out I was searching for this, for you, for home." "I love you," Sarah said, leaning her head against his shoulder. "That day you rode up and found me destroying my hands trying to chop wood, I thought I was at the end of everything. I never imagined I was at the beginning." "I loved you from that first moment," Cole confessed. "Watching you refuse to quit, refuse to cry, just keep swinging that axe even though you were bleeding and exhausted. I thought, that is a woman worth knowing, worth staying for." They stood together in the Montana sunshine, surrounded by the golden aspens that had witnessed the beginning of their story. In the distance, they could hear their children playing, their laughter carried on the mountain wind. The woodpile beside the house stood tall and neatly stacked, enough to see them through the coming winter and beyond. Sarah looked at her hands, at the calluses and small scars that told the story of years of hard work. These were capable hands now, strong hands, hands that had built a life alongside the man she loved. She thought about that desperate girl she had been, chopping wood until her palms bled, alone and afraid and clinging to hope by her fingernails. She thought about the cowboy who had stopped to help, who had wrapped her hands and split her logs, and then stayed to split her life open into something bigger and more beautiful than she had dared to imagine. Sometimes salvation came in the most unexpected forms, riding up on a bay horse with storm-gray eyes and a heart generous enough to see another person's need and meet it without question or expectation. "Come on," Cole said, taking her hand. "Let us go home." They walked down the hillside together, toward the house filled with the noise and warmth of their family. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Smoke rose from the chimney and Sarah could smell dinner cooking, could hear their eldest son calling his siblings in from play. This was home. This was love. This was the life that had grown from a single act of kindness, from a cowboy who chose to stay and a woman who chose to let him. As they reached the house and their children ran to greet them, Sarah sent up a silent prayer of thanks for blistered hands and split logs and unexpected grace on a lonely Montana homestead. That night, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Sarah and Cole sat together on the porch they had built the previous summer. The stars blazed overhead in the clear mountain air, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote sang its lonely song. Cole held Sarah's hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. "Tell me again," Sarah said softly. "Tell me about that first day, what you were thinking." Cole smiled, knowing this was a story she never tired of hearing. "I was riding along the road, thinking about nothing in particular when I heard the sound of an axe. I looked over and saw this beautiful woman attacking a woodpile like it had personally wronged her. Your hair was everywhere, your dress was soaked with sweat, and you looked absolutely ferocious. I thought you were magnificent." "I looked like a disaster," Sarah protested, laughing. "You looked like survival, like strength, like everything I had been searching for without knowing it." Cole lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "I told myself I was just stopping to help someone in need. But the truth is, I think I knew right then. I think my wandering days were over the moment I saw you." "My father knew too," Sarah said. "Even as sick as he was, he saw it before I did. He told me you were a good man, that I should give you a reason to stay. I am so glad I listened." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, just being together. The night wind carried the scent of pine and coming autumn. In a few weeks, the aspens would turn gold again, marking another year in the cycle of their life together. "Cole," Sarah said eventually, "do you remember what you told me that first night about owing the world a debt for the family that helped you when you were injured?" "I remember. I think you paid that debt 100 times over, not just with me but with everything you have done, the way you have lived. You are a good man, the best man I have ever known." Cole was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "You made me that man, Sarah. Before you, I was just drifting, not caring much about anything. You gave me purpose. You gave me a reason to be better." "We made each other better," Sarah said firmly. "That is what love does." As they sat together under the vast Montana sky, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From that desperate day, chopping wood with bleeding hands, to this moment of peace and contentment, from loneliness and fear to love and family. Life was still hard, the work was still endless, but it was a good life, a rich life, a life worth living. Inside the house, baby Grace began to cry, and Sarah rose to tend to her. Cole followed, as he always did, a partner in every aspect of their life together. As Sarah nursed the baby and Cole checked on the other sleeping children, she felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over her. This was what mattered. Not grand adventures or accumulated wealth, but this quiet love, this daily choice to show up for each other, to work together, to build something lasting. It was the kind of love that started with wrapped hands and split logs, but grew into something that could weather any storm. The months and years continued to unfold in their predictable patterns. Winters came and went, each one faced with adequate preparation and the warmth of their growing family. Springs brought planting and hope, summers brought growth and hard work, autumns brought harvest and reflection. Through it all, Sarah and Cole remained devoted to each other and to the life they had built. Their children grew strong and capable. Young Thomas inherited his father's way with horses and his mother's determination. The girls, Elizabeth and Grace, were fearless and bright, learning to ride and shoot and manage the homestead alongside their brothers. The youngest, Samuel, was a quiet child who loved books and spent hours reading by the fire, reminding Sarah of her mother, the teacher. Cole taught all the children to work hard and be honest, to value kindness over toughness, to help those in need without expectation of reward. Sarah taught them to read and write and think, to question and learn and never stop growing. Together, they raised children who were prepared for the harsh realities of frontier life, but who also understood compassion and community. The homestead continued to prosper. Cole's horse breeding business grew beyond their expectations, and people came from miles around to buy his well-trained animals. Sarah's garden expanded to include medicinal herbs, and she became known in the area for her healing knowledge, helping neighbors with everything from coughs to childbirths. They were no longer struggling to survive, but were instead thriving, contributing members of their community. 20 years after that first meeting, Cole and Sarah sat together on the porch of their much-expanded home. Their children were grown now. Thomas had married a girl from a neighboring homestead and was building his own place with his father's help. Elizabeth was being courted by a young man from town, and the wedding would likely happen by summer. The younger two were still at home, but not for much longer. "Can you believe it has been 20 years?" Sarah asked, her hand finding Cole's as naturally as breathing. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday," Cole replied. "Other times it feels like I have always been here, like there was never a time before you." "Are you happy?" Sarah asked, the same question she had asked so many times over the years. "Every single day," Cole answered, also as he always did. "Sarah, you took a broken-down cowboy with no home and no future and gave him everything. You gave me a life worth living. How could I be anything but happy?" Sarah leaned against his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, still strong despite the silver threading through his hair. Her own hair had streaks of white now, and her hands bore the permanent marks of years of hard work, but she had never felt more beautiful because of the way Cole still looked at her, with love and admiration and a devotion that had only deepened with time. "You know what I think about sometimes," Sarah said. "I think about what would have happened if you had just ridden past that day. If you had decided it was not your problem, that you had your own concerns. Where would I be now?" "You would have survived," Cole said with certainty. "You are the strongest person I know. You would have found a way." "Maybe, but it would have been such a lonely survival. You gave me more than help with the wood, Cole. You gave me partnership, companionship, love. You gave me a reason to do more than just survive." "We gave that to each other," Cole said, echoing her words from years earlier. "That is what love does." They sat together as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in the brilliant colors they had witnessed thousands of times but never tired of. The aspens were golden again, shimmering in the evening light. From inside the house came the sounds of Grace setting the table and Samuel reading aloud to himself, preparing for the teaching position he hoped to get in Bannack. This was their life, built from kindness and hard work, and a love that had started as a spark and grown into a steady, enduring flame. It was not a life of ease or luxury, but it was a life of meaning and connection, of family and purpose. It was everything. As darkness fell and the first stars appeared, Cole and Sarah rose and went inside together, ready to share another evening meal with their family, to sit by the fire and talk and laugh and simply be together. The wood Cole had split that first day was long since burned, but its warmth had never faded. It lived on in the home they had built, in the love they had nurtured, in the legacy they would leave for their children and grandchildren. Sarah looked at her husband across the dinner table, surrounded by the children they had raised and the life they had created, and knew with absolute certainty that letting him stay had been the best decision of her life. That cowboy who had wrapped her bleeding hands and split her logs had also split open her heart and filled it with more love than she had ever thought possible. And every day, with every shared glance and gentle touch, with every challenge faced together and every victory celebrated side by side, they proved that sometimes the greatest loves begin with the simplest acts of kindness, and that a life built on that foundation could weather any storm and stand the test of time.